Welcome to Uncorked, a Cult Wines podcast where we take you behind the scenes of the fine wine market. I'm Tom Gearing, CEO of Cult Wines, and as ever, I am joined by my co-host, Jonathan Stevenson.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well.
Good. The point of this podcast is we like to take you behind the scenes of what's happening in the fine wine market, talk to you about the key trends, what's going on, and really a deep dive into the fine wine market. And today we are joined by someone who's going to really lift the lid on the wine distribution system, someone that's been working in the industry for a number of years. And I'm really excited about this episode because I think for those listening at home, they're going to get a real treat in finding out some information they probably have never even realised before. So welcome Hermione Egerton-Smith, who is Senior Fine Wine Buyer at Cult Wines. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
Good. We're very excited to have you too. So yeah, the first half of this pod really is going to be a focus around sort of the buying side of the fine wine market. I feel for a lot of the podcast so far, the focus has been a lot more on the selling side. What's been going on, what are people buying? Obviously that kind of dominates the market in a way, but in a weird way, actually, how wines are distributed actually has a massive impact on what can or cannot sell. And so I think getting your insights around your experiences, especially in the different regions, because I think that's something people don't really know about, how different regions are distributed differently, is going to be really interesting. So we're very happy to have you
Hermione.
here.
Great to see you. I thought maybe we could just kick off with a bit of an insight from you in terms of your wine journey, how you got into fine wine buying. And yeah, some experiences maybe just to kick off that have sort of shaped your approach to what you do.
I got into wine, so I've been at Cult Wines coming up 11 years, and when I first moved into wine, when I first started my career, I told a lot of my friends that I had a job in wine, and they all looked at me in quite a confused way and said, "But you don't like wine, you only drink beer." So that was quite an interesting way to start, but I have absolutely loved it ever since. I began in a more generalized role and quite quickly decided that the sourcing, the buying side of it was what I was fascinated in. So over the years, I have been spending my time buying and really enjoying the role.
Nice.
Can I just say quickly, 11 years, we have a small round of applause there. I think, if this was the football world, you'd get a testimonial. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the equivalent of a testimonial is in the wine world. Yeah, exactly. Being on this show, you have to work for us for 10 years before you get to sit in this seat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But sorry, just before you move on, you left out a tiny weeny little bit of your career experience. What were you doing precisely before you joined Cult Wines? Because I think it's an interesting little tidbit.
So before Cult Wines, I was a PA, and I used to work for Trinity and Susanna. So a very, very different career choice, moving from being a PA into wine buying.
And how would you rate what me and Jonathan are wearing for today's podcast? Given your experience in the area.
Given my experience in
your
the
expertise.
area, it wouldn't be what not to wear. It is what to wear. The opposites.
Thank you very much.
Opposites attract.
It's now this is the fourth pod.
Yeah, we're getting there now. We've been through a few.
Yeah. Branded mic muffs. Branded note cards, I suppose.
Note cards? Yeah, exactly.
Coordinated outfits. You can expect more from that.
Fantastic.
H, do you have any memorable first big purchase or sourcing stories?
So I think my memories are not necessarily in sort of by value or by volume, but more something that I was quite proud of. Something that we spend a lot of time working on is building up direct allocations, whether that's with champagne or with French wines or Italians or whatever it might be. And
just, a quick step back. So direct allocations, so I'm sure you're about to give a bit more detail. But.
So a direct allocation is where we buy directly from the producers rather than going down the sort of typical distribution route of buying through other merchants or negociants. So when you buy through direct from a producer, it is a lot of relationships. It's working closely with the wineries to understand what it is they want, what they can sell, how we can help. So one of my sort of special moments, I guess, was when I got an allocation with Philippinat, a champagne house. And I guess that was sort of the start to realizing that side of buying.
Nice.
Did you get? I mean, for you personally, was it more enjoyable doing that type of buying than kind of, because I think like a buyer's job is kind of multifaceted. It could be finding an amazing cachet of like really old rare wines that you hardly ever find on a market because of an incredible network that you've got. Where realistically, that's never going to come from a producer. Versus this, that's probably, as you said, like longer term. It's taken 6, 12, 18 months worth of effort of meeting them once, twice, 3 times. Really kind of building that relationship. How would you describe the feeling for you between, getting that first allocation that maybe you put all that effort in versus the other side, which could probably be equally as exciting, right? Especially if you then know the sales team have gone away and sold it for an amazing price or generated a huge amount of revenue. Is there a way that you can maybe talk to like how that feeling for you differs?
So I think for me, the part that I enjoy the most about buying is the relationships. And as you say, you have relationships direct with the producers, but also with suppliers. Both are equally as important, and you have to put the time in. But with a producer, you often have the opportunity to go to the winery and you get first-hand experience of what they are making and a real insight into their philosophy. So that's that for me is great because it's a continuation. You don't get an allocation after a quick phone call. It's a work. You have to speak to them, you have to go back. You often start off with a relatively small allocation, and then over time that can grow. So I think for me it is the relationship side of the job that I love the most, and when you're doing it direct with a producer, that's pretty special.
No, it's really interesting. In terms of the different regions, how would you describe, an interaction where, you're trying to get an allocation, say in Champagne versus, Italy versus the US versus Bordeaux? Like, how do they differ in terms of, one, just the relationship side, but two, just like how they're structured as a market?
So Europe is pretty similar in the sense that if you're getting a direct allocation, it is a question of, going to the winery and speaking to them and then working from there. The US is a little bit different because it's harder to get direct allocations. So a lot of the time, a lot of the big wines, they sell to those on their mailing list.
Yep.
And then once it's been sold to someone
and for those who don't understand what a mailing list is, and that's quite a unique thing, I think, for the US. So maybe you can just describe what a mailing list is for US wineries.
So a mailing list is where you basically just put your name down as like a private client to say that you want to buy their wines. And each year when they have a new release, you will get an allocation of that. It tends to go directly to clients rather than necessarily to companies. That wine, so take Screaming Eagle as an example, as one of the most expensive US wines, that gets sold to a person who then will sell it most likely to a merchant who would then sell it to us, Cult Wines, and we would then pass it along to the client. So there's quite a long road for that wine before it reaches the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But with Europe, it's a lot easier to go. Well, not easier, but it's
almost flipped the other way around, right?
Yeah.
And I think for someone listening at home, they might feel, okay, you have someone that produces wine and they're selling it direct to people that want to buy the wine. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
I think they call it D2C. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the abbreviation. If I was listening at home and I didn't know anything about wine, surely that's, surely if I want to buy wine from a French chateau, I just go and buy it direct. But it's kind of flipped completely the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and also it's just like a really celebrated thing in the US. If you when you speak to big collectors in the US, and the first thing they'll tell you is, "Oh, I'm on the list for Screaming Eagle, for Harlem, for all of these top names." And I think it will probably come on to it later, but I think it creates quite an interesting and quite a weird divergence of how these wines are then brought to market and how they ultimately then perform and how they're shared and retraded. It's a bit of a, I guess the only thing on our side of the pond, as it were, that would be somewhat similar is getting direct allocations of things like DRC, which obviously is still middlemanned by big merchants that have their direct allocation, but you do get that same first price point for like their very top collectors that get access to the Romanée-Conti, albeit in much smaller quantities. So I think it's just one of those where, as we look at the market now, and obviously with the tariff conversations that we've been having here, it strikes me that side of distribution in the US is something that may well change over the coming few years.
Yeah.
Or
It's interesting
need
if
to
you actually
change.
look at the US market. I mean, the one brand that has kind of bucked that trend, and probably to its advantage, has been Opus One, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a bit of a dichotomy, right? For other cult Napa cabs, which obviously don't have the production levels, like a McDonald's, for example, I think they make like 500 cases. They don't really have the opportunity, I suppose, of distribution. But I suppose my point was, with Opus One, they kind of have bucked the trend in that they actually actively went through the Plaster Bordeaux, something you know a lot about, and maybe we can talk to you about the Plaster Bordeaux and your experiences there. But actually, in a way, if you look at all US wines, what's probably the most recognised brand globally, the most well-distributed US wine globally? What do you think?
Opus One.
It'd be Opus One, right? So, they kind of went away from that kind of direct-to-consumer winery mailing list model. They probably still do it to a certain extent, but that isn't necessarily the kind of cherished thing in the collector's armory to say, oh, I'm on the Opus One mailing list because it's kind of well-distributed. But then on the flip side of that, it's... And we'll come onto this in the later part of this podcast when we talk about the half-year review of the wine market. Opus One dominates the market in terms of trading volumes, liquidity. And I think it's actually really benefited by making that decision that they wanted to be distributed from the Plaster Bordeaux. Yeah. So Hermione, from your perspective, what advantages do you think a winery like Opus One has got out of, wanting to be distributed through the Place? And what is the Plaster Bordeaux, something that people may have heard of before? And what does it do as a function of the wine market?
So I think with Opus, it's quite interesting because, as you say, they're going through Plaster Bordeaux, which is the sort of place of Bordeaux where wines are sold via négociants. So if you look at the and
maybe what's a négociant?
Oh,
just to think, like, if I don't even know what that means.
So
right?
a négociant is sort of as such an importer. So the wine goes from Opus One. If you think of it sort of as like a rally race, you've got Opus One at the start. They then pass the baton on to the négociant or the importer. That then gets passed on to us, the merchant, and then we pass it on to our clients. So you've got a whole race and a sort of a route that the wine is taking. Because it goes via Le Place and because it goes via négociants, they then have the ability to distribute their wines to merchants worldwide. We also have that as an option. We have the distribution that we can then pass our wines and sell them to customers all over the world, which gives really good diversity of where the wines are ending up.
Yeah.
Because you've got...
they kind of control it from a geographical distribution perspective. Yeah,
exactly. And Opus One also has the option to sort of decide which markets they want the wines to be sold in, which is why they've done such a good job of getting their wines distributed.
And you have
worldwide.
very different approaches from a wine perspective. The winery itself, depending on how closely connected they are with their, next stage in the relay race, like you said, if they're really on top and speaking to the négociants. I think one thing that we came across years ago was kind of that level of data that we were starting to build in terms of where these wines were being traded most. I think we also had some allocations where we were able to get more allocation because we could show that we were distributing these to our clients in Asia particularly. And I think that from that perspective it's just interesting, as you say, to see what a big difference that can make, and whether you're based in the US, in South America, in other regions across the world, you can still use the Place. You'd say that the Place de Bordeaux and the négociant system is probably the biggest single distributor of wines globally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird though, because the whole geographical distribution model, which I think a lot of wineries and a lot of regions employ, the problem you have is you have like a really well-known Burgundy producer. It's expensive, and they'll go, well, we need that to be sold in Scandinavia. We need that to be sold in Northern Europe, in Central America, North America, etc., etc. And obviously, allocate different levels of volume. But what you have is you'll have an importer who's in, I don't know, let's say Norway, for example, or Denmark. They actually don't have a local market for that wine. Let's say it's €1,000 a bottle plus. They don't have enough local market demand to actually sell that through, but they're never ever going to let go of that allocation. And what happens is they just flip the wines, and they'll flip the wines into the European market, they'll flip the wines into the UK market, into the US market, into the Asian market, which is where most of the demand is coming from. And so you have this weird model where it's kind of, frustrating in a way, because the wines will always end up in the places that they can be sold the most. But in a way, they go through this kind of very inefficient process of, as you're saying with this relay race, well, it's a relay race with a couple of added, batons added on, a couple of extra runners in the race that don't need to be there. Just because I think the producers or the wineries want to feel like, oh, we sell in 80 countries worldwide, it goes to this, and this. But actually, who is the end customer and who's actually getting it? And if it is all concentrated in maybe 2 or 3 or 4 places, then it's kind of a little bit misleading in a way. And I think that is one of the frustrations of the fine wine supply chain, which is you have a lot of this fragmentation and you have a lot of this inefficiencies.
I think that's why going direct makes a lot of sense, because you are missing out the middlemen, but you are still doing the job that the producer wants. You can, still have the conversations about where the wines can be sold. It also gives the option of doing, going and doing events and clients visiting the wineries and having a much more personable relationship with the producers. Yeah, as you say, missing out the middlemen.
Yeah. So you must have been very fortunate to visit a lot of different regions around the world.
I have. It's definitely a perk of the job.
Right. What's the top 3 for you?
Top 3, South America.
Number one. Yeah, because I actually because who did you get invited? You went on like some incredible trip.
Yeah,
there, didn't you?
that was unbelievable. That was with Hatch.
But who was the producer who?
Who the producers? It was quite a few. We saw Senya, we saw Razaras, we saw quite a lot. It was a very full on, exciting trip to have the opportunity to go.
And did you travel between countries and? Yeah, you went into some like in like the hillsides, and I remember you showing me some photos. It was just like spectacular, right?
Yeah. It was a really interesting experience, because it's not every day you get to go to South America, so it was good to have that. Second, I would say Champagne. Right. I just love Champagne. I just I could go there anytime. Yeah. And I mean, Bordeaux is always close to my heart. Yeah. Spend quite a lot of time there, visiting the chateaus and just understanding more and more about, their wines and everything. Yeah. But that's just a few places. I
mean, look, I have to echo your comments around Champagne. I was there recently, last month, and it's just such a fantastic place to visit, especially in the summer, and it's beautiful and so well set up. I think that's probably the thing for me. It's, you look at these different wine regions and how they kind of welcome guests and tourists and how well structured they are. But I think, Champagne's one of those places that is, incredibly well set up for visitors, and you just have such an amazing time there. Obviously the wines are fantastic, but the ambiance, the environment, the food that you can have, the restaurants, it's absolutely superb. And if you're in the UK and you're from London, you can drive there I actually left London, we drove, and it only took us like 5 hours door to door. And you think to yourself, well, that's actually closer to Newcastle.
So factoring all of that stuff in, you'd say Champagne. Well, listen, Newcastle's still worth a visit, but but you'd factoring all of those aspects in terms of to our listeners, you'd say Champagne is your top pick in the summer.
For me, not necessarily my top pick. I was just saying the convenience of living in London and being able to drive to Le Châtel in an hour and a half an hour train, 2 hours to Reims, and be in Champagne, like leave at 9, you're there by 3 p.m. Mm-hmm. Like that's incredibly convenient. There's no other wine region that's that accessible for the UK. No, there is like no, everywhere else is obviously a plane ride away. It's a little bit further. Obviously, Bordeaux is a short plane journey, but I just think that there's something unique around that accessibility to it.
So let me maybe just ask, just quickly. So going back to kind of the complexities of wine distribution, like what in terms of like traditions or quirks, do you think since you've been in the market for a long time, do you see that there has been a noticeable change in some of these aspects? Do you think the market is evolving? Do you see kind of further changes that you would like to see or want to impact in terms of improvements to maybe in some places, like Tom said? I think there's kind of a growing feeling that in many places in the fine wine market, given this past period of correction the market has been through, that there's probably parts in all parts of the market that need a bit of a facelift, so to speak. Do you see anything obvious that stands out in the sort of distribution sense that you think could improve?
I mean, I think something that has massively improved over the years is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes on both sides. It goes on the, producer side and the negotiants and the suppliers, but also transparency for our customers, because they have now access to a lot more data that they didn't have before. So, for example, Wine Searcher, they're able to go on and have a look to see what, global prices are for certain wines. And I think in the past, everyone wanted to be very sort of quiet about the wine trade, whereas today I think it's really important that people talk about it, especially in a downturn market. I think people need to be able to discuss and almost sort of work as a collective to try and rebuild the wine trade to where it has been in the past. And I think transparency is a really big part of that.
If someone's listening at home or watching, couple of questions for you. What advice would you give someone who wants to get into the industry in the same way that you kind of did 11 years ago? Is there any sort of tips you would give to try and break your way in? Let's just ask that first of all.
I'd like to see more women in the wine trade. I think it is there are more and more, but I think it is a really interesting career, especially if you want to get into the buying side of it. I think you've got to be curious. You've got to enjoy the sort of analytical side of it, but also be passionate about wine. So you can do both, and I get to do both in my job daily. I think just, go in. I started as an intern, as I said. It gave me sort of a view of both sides of it. I don't think there are that many interns now, but I think just sort of go in with an open mind. And there's so many different roles that you can do in wine. So I think, I mean, I love my job, so
what's the biggest misconception people have around your job?
That I just drink wine all day.
Yeah. I was gonna say. I was in my head. I was like, I know what you're gonna say. You just drink wine all day.
I just drink wine all day. Yeah.
Just when you're podcasting.
Well, exactly.
That's just your job, Tom.
Yeah. and like specifically being a buyer, like what skill set do you think someone needs to have to be a good buyer?
Well, I would, being a buyer, I'd say it's sort of, there are three aspects of my job. There's analysis, there's the relationships, and then there's strategy. And all three of those fall under being a buyer. Analysis is, an offer will come past my desk. I'll have a look at it. I'll look at prices. I'll look at the producer. I'll look at, critic scores. I'll look at price changes for that particular wine. Make a decision, based on those, whether or not I then want to have a conversation with the sales team to see if it's something they think they can sell. From that, you have the relationship. So that is when I would have to do the negotiating with either the producer or the supplier to sort of say the wines that we are interested in. And
so you have to be good with numbers, do you think?
You have to be good with numbers, and you have to be good on Excel.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay, right.
And then,
do you think with stuff like AI, that's going to be as an important part of the role? Or do you think that's always going to be there?
I think it will always be there.
Yeah.
I think AI obviously is always handy, and I think a lot of people can use it. But I think
I suppose you're talking a lot around like sort of the kind of relationship side of things. So communication is important, right?
Yeah, hugely important. Communication, relationships. Be okay to hear no. I think that happens a lot. And then the final part is the strategy, which is, making decisions. It used to be a lot more reactive. So an offer would come and then you would decide if you wanted it. Whereas now it's a lot more strategic in that you look down the road to what you want to sell and when you want to sell it. So I think.
So you're sort of building as you go, basically. So in order to think about the future allocation for something else, you're thinking about how much volume to take on this particular one. I think it's really interesting. And I think, do you find as well that obviously, your approach has changed over the years as well? Because naturally, when you then get more experience, you start to work closer with certain people that you realise, and I imagine obviously it's a relatively small world, because of, like you said, the communication aspect around who has what, and when you're going to need to push certain buttons with certain people. Is that I'm sure is something that you just get more akin to over time.
Yeah, and it's also knowing who has what, who will offer Italian wines or who will offer some French wines. It's, not everyone has all the regions, so you've got to have quite a good sense of suppliers and of pre-planning the strategy.
Interesting.
Looking ahead.
Well, look, thank you very much for your insights around the buying side of the market. I think it's been a really interesting and insightful conversation. So we really appreciate you lifting the lid and telling the world a few of the kind of secrets of the wine world.
Yeah, well, I think it's fascinating. So, yeah.
And I'm sure everyone at home will absolutely agree. So cheers to that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, cheers. Are we going to cover the wine very quickly that we're drinking?
You chose it, so yeah, I think you can lead the way.
So we are obviously just thought that a Riesling was a nice change of pace. We've had some good reds, and I thought that this has been very good. I think it's
the summer months, isn't it?
Yeah, it's nice.
I would usually say this is typically quite a warm room, but actually today it's relatively cool.
Relatively cool.
You've come on a good day before it's been kind of roasting.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty
maybe
tasty.
in the more
it's warming up. I think as is the wine, but no, it's a really good expression I think of Riesling. I think Riesling perhaps is I would say having a bit of a good few years in terms of people's access. Going back to what we've discussed, I think it strikes me that there are a lot more Rieslings around available now, getting a lot more coverage. Good price points typically. It's a nice change of pace. I think maybe my sort of previous conception of Riesling was that it wasn't as well known. People weren't quite sure about whether to go, dry or whether to, it's a more challenging and more complex region, right? So I just think.
But I think that's probably been the biggest. Obviously change goes without saying, but I think that's the big thing with Riesling, which is go back 20 years ago, and I think maybe 70-80% of Riesling produced was either semi-dry or sweet. And actually this whole movement towards producing dry Riesling, whereas today I think it's probably almost swung the other way, where the majority of Rieslings produced today is dry Riesling. I think that what the German producers have recognised is they have incredible terroir. They have, vine age of, 40, 50 years plus. Obviously they've got the infrastructure, they've got the knowledge and the expertise and the know-how. And I think comparatively, it is one of those great varieties that, you talk about Riesling, of course, there's some great expressions in Australia, there's some great expressions in the US, but I think everyone understands and appreciates the home of Riesling is in Germany, and I think that's quite unique for a great varietal to kind of have that. And I think that the German market, especially over the last 10 years, I think the dry Rieslings are just really, really getting to a level where they're competing with the best, whites from Burgundy. And I think that, the ageability of the wines is incredible as well. The acidity is obviously extremely high. That's incredibly important for aging. And so to be able to have, dry Rieslings or Rieslings that are sweet or semi-dry that are, 50, 60, 70, even 100 years old is not unheard of. So I think they've really rode this wave, and I think that it's as you said today, there's good value.
It's really good value.
How much is this per bottle?
30 quid.
Yeah, about 30 quid a bottle retail. Yeah. I mean, it's an absolutely brilliant wine. It's a Grand Cru, as I can see from the label. And
I just think it would surprise a lot of people as well. I think if you didn't know where to start with Riesling, that's a great start point. Price wise, the dryness, the acidity's there. And I think it's a sort of wine that quite a lot of people would go for if they knew what that tasted like, if that makes sense. So, it's a good one. Should we move quickly on? Conscious of time here, but I know that, Tom, you've got some really interesting, or we've got some really interesting things to discuss around the half-yearly report.
Obviously we're in the summer recess, as it were.
Exactly that. Time to look back.
And from Hermione's perspective, it's a great time of year because everyone in the wine industry goes on holiday for a month, so it's a good time for you to relax.
So I will just
even if you wanted to buy wine, you can't.
I will be drinking wine all day.
Exactly. So we're working on and producing and have produced a half yearly report. I think the main differential between what we've produced this year and what has been produced in the past or by other commentators is we've looked solely at transactional data. For us, we've looked at all the transactional data from the last 5 years, and we're really looking at sort of the trends between what happened in 2024 and what happened in 2025. So just to put that into perspective for people listening at home, we have access to transactional data from exchanges, platforms, publicly available data like auction houses. We also have our own marketplace, CultX, where people are buying and selling wines every day. We also have our wholesale trade side of the business where we're selling into hotels, restaurants, but as well as into importers, distributors, merchants all over the world. So amongst all of these different venues of exchanging and selling wine, we're collating all the transactional data. So that underpins this report. We're looking at all the transactional data, and to put that into context for people at home, that database of information is around £280 million worth of transactions over the last 5 years. So we're looking at that data and we're looking at the trends of wine. So for the half yearly report, we've just evaluated and looked at what are the price trends we've seen in the first half of 2025, versus 2024. So there's been 15,000, this is a very specific number, 15,638 trades year to date within that database. That's covering 2,774 unique wines. I think the first thing to say is, we're going to make a lot of comments around volumes, and we're going to make a lot of comments around price. So the general takeaway from 2025 is that prices have continued to fall, but we are seeing rising activity. So to put that into context, if you look at all of the wines in that I just mentioned, on average, the transactional prices are 7% down. So an easy way to describe this is the wine market is 7% down in 2025. But on the other hand, trading volumes are up. So we are seeing wines change hand more frequently. We are seeing volumes traded higher than they were last year. And currently, year to date, we're 6.3% higher in 25 to 24. And I think that's a really important point, because if prices were falling and we weren't seeing a pickup in activity, we weren't seeing trading activity or volumes picking up, then I would be concerned around that, because it would suggest that even though prices have come down, there still isn't enough people willing to buy at these new lower price levels.
Which is a bit like where we were last year, obviously.
Yeah, and I think if it was this time last year and we were looking at 23 versus 24, to your point, we might be looking at something where we know prices went down from 23 to 24, probably sharper than that 7%, but we probably would have been looking at volumes of trading that were lower, right? So, that's something to really think about. The other thing to think about is kind of like the frequency of trading. So we actually tracked how many wines are trading on a monthly basis, and we're up 4.8%. So there's 585 wines that are trading monthly. And actually on a weekly basis, we're 38% up this year. So at the moment, there's 86 wines that are trading on a weekly basis. So look, I appreciate that I'm just throwing just many stats at you guys and not letting you have an opportunity to jump in. But what's your initial takeaway on like the broad top level stats there? Effectively, prices are down. Prices are trading lower than they were last year, but volumes are up. Is that the type of thing you're seeing in the market? What's your takeaway from that?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think it's, and I'm sure H, you would agree, that we've been through quite probably a slightly fragmented start to the year in good and bad. I think the start of the year we saw a lot more trade out to Asia, which had been in the last couple of years a lot more difficult to see in terms of the volumes. And then we've obviously in a macro sense been hit with a little bit more sitting on hands. We've had the interest rates haven't come down perhaps as much as we expected. We've seen the tariffs that have caused people to slightly freeze on things. So I think, just like anecdotally, I think I've felt that there have been more trades. There has been more volume of trade. And I think, to Tom's point, I think the fact that pricing on those trades has come down by only 7% and has increased as much as it has in terms of volume does start to show that clearly prices are finding a point where people are willing buyers. You must see similar when you're negotiating on price, right?
I think it's definitely interesting from my perspective looking at pricing, and I would say that a lot of people are more open to reducing the price of certain wines to be able to to make sales, which obviously then is why we're seeing wines being traded at the lower end, but the volume is still is gone up because people still want to sell. I guess it's a buyer's market at the moment. So we are definitely seeing prices coming down.
Yeah, no, I think, I just think it's like anything. It's been a case in the last period where, as Tom mentioned, I think it's when you're not seeing the volume being picked up at those price points, obviously to find those buyers, the price has to continue to come down. And I think it's definitely been notable in certain areas, certain wines, that things have started to stabilise. And obviously what we're looking at here in terms of these numbers, I think does start to lean towards that being the case. I don't think it's necessarily been a turning point overnight, but I think over the course of the next few months, if we see a continuation of these numbers over the rest of this year, that would put in mind, kind of where I'm expecting things to head in terms of volumes continuing to increase, maybe prices settling a little bit more closely to current market levels.
Yeah, look, I think the headline figures are always going to be around price. And look, at the end of the day, prices are down 7%, as I said, on all the average transactions of wines that have traded this year and last. But actually, let's dig into the data. Let's dig into the numbers. Let me give you some examples, and maybe this will kind of get the juices flowing a little bit. So let's look at Bordeaux first. We talk about Bordeaux as being the biggest part of the investment market. There's 865 wines that have traded in both 24 and 25. So from a negative perspective, 80% of those wines have actually traded on average at a lower price than they did last year, with only 20% of those wines trading at a higher price this year than they did last year. And I think that kind of fits with the general trend. In fact, actually Bordeaux is performing slightly worse than the total across all regions, which is 74% of trading down. So 80% versus 74%. So you can still see the Bordeaux markets in a slightly more suppressed state. But let me just give you one example. Okay, so you look at the surface level stats and you say, okay, doom and gloom, numbers are down, more wines are trading down, average prices are down. Okay, I get it, understand that kind of looks bad. But let's look at the trading data. Mouton Rothschild is a really interesting example. So far, year to date, there's been 453 transactions recorded for Mouton Rothschild in the market. And that's versus 614 for the whole of 2024, right? So on a comparative like-for-like basis, we are on target to be 26% up. So, just looking at how much Mouton has traded in the market, we're 26% up year on year. And probably the best illustration of this is Mouton 2016. 2016, incredible vintage for Bordeaux. I think Mouton 16 is a triple 100-point wine. Very much regarded as probably one of the best ever Moutons produced. And I suppose coming up to almost 10 years of age, right? Not bottle age, but certainly 10 years since the vintage was created. This year, that wine has traded 102 times. 102 times already in the half year. Last year, that's 71% more than it was trading last year. So we're seeing the trades go up 71%, but the price is down 10%. So the price is now under £400 a bottle. It's £397 per bottle. So that, what does that tell you? I mean, what is your immediate reaction to those type of data points?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways. I think it's a really interesting foundation of data. I think there's my immediate thought goes towards, okay, well, regionally, where are these trades being impacted most? As I mentioned, I think we all were aware that there was a much bigger presence in Asia ahead of Chinese New Year at the start of this year versus last year. Maybe that's had an impact. So I think the core data there is really quite interesting. I think it maybe speaks into the age of the wine, speaks into the profile of the vintage. Like you said, it's a multiple 100-point scoring wine. You'd expect that those sort of more trophy and celebrated wines are the ones that people will immediately look to for value first. So when they see a price point that they're currently happy with for that wine versus a wine that maybe hasn't got quite as much global cachet or steer, whatever, it's where the biggest. What's the saying? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. That type of notion for the biggest, best wines of the market are the ones that perhaps saw the biggest drop off, but are going to be the ones that are most attracted to being bought now when the prices are good.
Yeah. We'll have a little game. What do you think's the best performing Bordeaux wine this year? And when I say best performing, we've looked at all the vintages that have traded, and we worked out how many vintages have traded higher in 25 than 24. So this is top of the charts. More vintages have traded at a higher price this year than last year. To give you a number, 6 vintages out of 15 have traded higher than last year. 9 are down. So that just shows you the state of the market, that the number one performing wine is at 40%. But what would you guess that is? Any ideas? Which quick fire?
I would go Mouton Rothschild.
Oh, I just said that it was one of the worst performing.
I should have been listening.
I'm going to go with Becherel.
Hopefully people are listening at home.
I'm going to go with Becherel.
Becherel, you can get one more go.
Okay, Pontet Canet.
Okay, good guess. Chateau Montrose. Chateau Montrose, 40% of vintage of Montrose have traded higher than they did last year. Any immediate thoughts around why?
I mean, that's quite surprising to me. I haven't thought of Montrose as being necessarily a wine that's as favoured as others. So that would be my reaction. Would be surprise.
Yeah, and then hot on the heels of that are the likes of Darmiac, Razon Segler, and Leopold Barton all clocking over 30% of vintages in positive territory. But I think this goes to what you talked to me about, and I think Montrose does fit this bill. I mean, what did you say to me before the podcast?
I think that value elements at hand. Yeah. So it's perhaps maybe my misconception over the last few years, but I always held Montrose as deuxième classé, right?
Yeah,
second growth.
Yeah.
I perhaps held it in slightly higher esteem than like a Darmiac or a Barton.
Okay, but Hermione, if you're buying Montrose, right, and you compare it to say the prices of Pichon Lalonde, second growth, okay, Palmer's not a second growth, it's a third growth, but let's say it's in that super seconds category. Du Cru, Montrose versus those wines in terms of price point, what would you be looking for? How would you compare them?
How would I compare them? I mean, I think it's
much better value, right?
much better value. Yeah. I mean, I think
Even Cos, for example.
yeah. I think Montrose is I think it is excellent value. I think it's a really great wine, and I think it is one that, you know, there's good volume out there. It's quite widely available. So yeah, it's a relatively easy one to pick up.
Right, I've got a final stat for Bordeaux. Which vintage do you think has the highest increase in volume of trading?
21.
2015.
And that is why she's senior fine wine buyer, because it is 2021. You've actually nailed it. So 2021 across all four first growths, because obviously Latour hasn't released, this year has traded 93% more than in 2024. So almost 100% increase in trading for the 2021 vintage, but it's also the cheapest 21 vintage.
Yep.
I mean, we heard reports recently around sort of Jancis Robinson quite negative about the quality of the vintage, some commentators talking about, 21, maybe not living up to expectations in terms of the quality of the wines. But once again, this is quite a good example of, yes, prices might have come down a little bit, but clearly there's a lot of people in the market trading these wines. I mean, what would you put that down to?
I mean, I personally really like the 21s. I think it's a much more approachable vintage than, some of the ones previous to 21. So I think it's a wine that people who aren't necessarily really savvy about wine or want something that is going to sit in the cellar for years, but something that can be, drunk earlier and it's approachable. And I mean, I personally think 21 was a great vintage.
Yeah. I know we're talking about Bordeaux a lot, but I just wanted to finish on one last data point for this, because I think it really does illustrate the opportunity in the market, but kind of where we are. So if you look at Haut-Brion 2021, that is officially the cheapest vintage of any first growth that you can buy on the market that's in bottle. This year it's traded 24 times already in the first half of the year, which is 50% up on last year, so 50% increase year to year. The average price has actually fallen 8.6%, but the average transaction price, what do you think the average price a bottle of Haut-Brion, first growth Haut-Brion, has been trading for in 2025? Average price per bottle?
Yeah.
390.
325.
£235 per bottle.
Wow.
That's in bonds. So last year was trading at 257 or 3,086 per 12, and this year it's been trading on average. Those 24 transactions have taken place at 2,820. I mean, that is, I think, the perfect illustration of where this market is right now. I think people are looking at that and they can't see anything else but incredible value.
Yeah.
You look, I mean, I think that's still a 95-point scored wine, right? So it's still well-scored wine. I think it was probably wine in the vintage for 21. As you said, 21's accessible, it's refined, it's a classic vintage. So for me, that's the perfect example where we are in the market, which is opportunities like that. And that's why I think trading's up, because I think there's just people in the market that look at that and go, how can you not see value in a £237 bottle of...
We should all be buying Haut-Brion
first
2021.
Bordeaux.
It's mad, yeah.
Imagine just having a case of that in your cellar and coming back to in 5 or 6 years' time, having some friends around for a dinner party.
It's going to be good.
And pulling out a Haut-Brion of 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age, and knowing in the back of your mind that's only cost you 250 quid.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to look like an absolute king.
Yeah.
First of all, everyone's going to think you're the biggest baller of all time.
Yeah.
But you
Well, that's
in the
what I was
back of
gonna
your
say,
head,
when
you know, you've been down Tesco's finest. you know.
Yeah. It's I think it's just like you said. I think it's a really crucial thing that needs to happen. We talked about communication and transparency, and these are all the words why I think it's so imperative at the moment that the whole wine market is delivering these type of stats, because like even we weren't aware exactly of like that level of value for Haute Brion, and if you look into the detail and story of Haute Brion and the first growth of Bordeaux, you know, these are the best wines made in the world.
Yeah.
And that really isn't a price, even if you're someone with a tighter budget, that most people that like wine can probably think about affording a bottle of that if they want to for a special occasion, and it inevitably is going to be worth double the price in 10 years time.
I think the other thing with Bordeaux in particular is they make good wine. Even in bad vintages, they still make good wine. So, 21 obviously isn't a stellar vintage, but it is still good wine. There are very few bad wines made out of Bordeaux. So, you're always on for 100%. A winner.
And the access, the volume, I think it's just, to your point, rather than labouring Bordeaux too much, I think it's just those examples are the ones that really should be made aware of, because that is just a crazy price.
Actually, I mean, just before we finish, I know we're spending loads on Bordeaux, but just last game, what do you think is the best performing wine from Bordeaux? And actually, just give me some stats, because when I say best performing, it has actually been pretty stellar. This wine is up 22% in trades from year to year. And the price, and this is going to give you a bit of a clue, but I think that will be helpful. In 2024, it traded on average at £1,067 per bottle, per case. And this year it's trading at £1,302. So it's about a 20% increase. I think it's just over 20% increase. Up 22% in trading. And yeah, what do you think? What do you think it is?
Bordeaux.
Yeah, Bordeaux, yeah. Best performing wine from Bordeaux, up 22% year to date. First half of the year. Trading's up, pricing's up. Let's get positive. What is it?
1,300 currently trading, yeah?
Yeah, 1,302. The average price for all the transactions this year is £1,302. Last year it was 1,067.
Lead us off.
I have no
Do you want
idea.
a clue? Do you want a clue? Do you want a clue?
Go on.
It scored 100 points. It got given 100 points this year.
This year.
Should give you a clue. What vintage got rescored this year?
I'm going to say it's a older vintage that was revisited. No? Okay.
No. Newest vintage.
Newest vintage,
Newest
right.
physical vintage. 22 Bordeaux.
Yeah, but I'm just struggling for which wine.
Ponte Cano?
No. Calms Haute Brion.
Oh.
Calms Haute Brion. So, there is pockets of light in this market. So, look, I'm just going to rattle off all the regions quickly, just so listeners at home know where we are. So, we went through Bordeaux. Best performing in terms of price change is Champagne. Only dropped 5.4% across all transactions. Next is Burgundy at 5.9%. Then rest of the world at 6.2%. We can talk about that a little bit later on, because I think some really interesting trends in the rest of the world category. Italy minus 7.2%. USA minus 10%. We can talk about that because I think it has been hit pretty hard. And finally, the Rhone, which is down the worst. On average, the wines that were traded this year and last year from the Rhone Valley have gone from $16.50 per 12 to $14.20. So that's minus 14%. So probably the worst performing out of all the categories. So that's where we are in terms of the numbers. But volumes are trading up in certain areas. Rest of the world is up 15%. 15% in terms of volumes of transactions.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear.
Exactly. So just looking at Burgundy quickly, I think what's interesting when we look at the data is, especially in Bordeaux and Burgundy, we are seeing the vintages that are performing the best, a little bit older, high quality. So if I look at Burgundy, for example, the top 3 vintages in terms of percentage of wines that are trading up, 2010, 2012 and 2009.
Yeah.
And the bottom 3 vintages in terms of performing the worst, in terms of the most amount of wines trading down, 2021 vintage, 22 vintage, and a 2017 vintage. What does that tell you?
Seeking quality again, same thing. Like prime vintages, good vintages, the most attractive to be buying right now, because they've been at their previous peaks and they've come down the most.
Yeah, Hermione, for you, I mean, does that say anything to you in terms of where the trends are in the market?
I mean, I think 17 and 21 are definitely considered off prime vintages, which is where we are seeing a lot of trades. They had a lot of stock as well, which they didn't sell at the time, just given the vintage, and it wasn't as popular as some of the others. So I think there is a lot more wine at there was a lot more wine before it's now all been bought, but at the chateaus themselves. And I think certain merchants were big buyers of those vintages, and able to sell now at a pretty discounted price.
Yeah, absolutely. Champagne, we talked about that, one of your favourite regions, somewhere I visited recently. Champagne, again, sort of treading water a little bit in terms of volumes are traded, quite similar to last year. Price have come down a little bit, but actually the best performing in terms of price performance. It's actually interesting when you start looking at sort of the individual performance. One of the best performing wines from Champagne is actually Egliore. Is that any surprise to you two to see that name up there?
No, I think it's quite interesting at the moment. I think people are moving away from some of the Grand Marque and moving closer to some of the grower champagnes, where there's definitely value and phenomenal champagnes are being made. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, and when anecdotally, I just think whenever you hear grower champagne, one of the first names mentioned now, obviously in our office, as well as I think other conversations, is Egliore. I think they've done a really good job of putting themselves forward as almost like the bigger name of the rest type thing. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me, and it's great wine.
Yeah, and like just to paint the picture as well, and I think this is kind of aligned with what we've seen in the other markets. We talked about the first growth and some of the trends around them, and the Mouton example. So here's a really good example. Louis Roederer, producer of Cristal, 11 vintages have traded this year. All 11 vintages are trading at a lower price. But the volumes are just up significantly on the last couple of years. And actually, compared to 2023, we're kind of at about 65% higher than where we were in 2023. So yeah, prices have dropped off, which is interesting to see the volume of trading really, really pick up and on target to be at least 20 to 30% above where we were for 2024. I mean, what does that, I mean, in a way, I kind of look at brands like Cristal and Dom Perignon and Krug as kind of, in a way, kind of being the bellwethers of the champagne market. Are you surprised to see those stats at all?
No, I don't think I am. I think it is changing. We're starting to see a big shift in what our customers are wanting to buy and what people are looking at.
Yeah.
I think there is just a shift, and that's where we are at the moment. So no, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and I think if you look, again, it's always about the context of we're looking at now, but what's gone before. And obviously Champagne as an index has been probably one of the most linear upward trending graphs to look at in the market for a long time. So I think, again, you can look back at previous vintages of the top Grand Marques and just see such great performance for such a long time that inevitably, if people had big volume, they might have been more willing to release a bit, causing this perhaps a little bit more oversupply in the market. So I think it's a great time to be looking into those areas. It's almost, with all of this data now available in the marketplace, it's important to just keep savvy to, okay, yes, there's the new big thing like your Egliore, but also don't overlook the fact you can still go back in time and pick up some fantastic vintages of the great Grand Marques at good levels. Yeah,
I think the overall takeaway for me is very similar to what we're seeing in Bordeaux and Burgundy, and I think it's a positive takeaway, which is, look, yes, headline figures are for the top champagne houses, whether it's Krug, whether it's Louis Roederer, generally speaking, Bollinger, we are seeing wines trade lower this year and last, but volumes are up in all those categories. Those wines are trading more often, but not 1%, 2%, 3% more. We're talking about big significant double-digit volumes higher. And for me, if you think about how any market works, which is demand, supply, it's buyers and sellers in the market, we know that in 23 and 24 we had too many sellers in the market and not enough buyers. And we know that pushes prices down. And we know what we're seeing this year in the first half of the data is that buyers are still getting good deals, but more buyers are willing to come to the table. And there is an inevitability that that equilibrium will be found. And once that equilibrium we found, we'll start to see prices stabilize and we'll start to see things come out the other way. Mm-hmm. I know I put you both on the spot significantly with my questions in the last round, but I will be doing it again. There is one wine that stands head and shoulders above any other in Champagne in terms of performance. Let me reel off some stats and that hopefully will guide you a little bit. So this wine, there's 3 vintages available on the market. The 98 vintage of this wine is up 14.5% year to date. It's traded quite a few times. I'm just trying to see what the price is. It's gone from 3,300 to 3,800 in 2025. The 2003 vintage is up 6%, and the 2006 vintage is up 7.1%. So in 3 of the vintages of this wine that have traded multiple times this year, it's up significantly and way, way better than the market.
What were the vintages again?
96,
Yeah.
2003, and 2006. And it's not like some very obscure wine.
No.
Because it's traded quite a few times.
Krug.
I was going to say Krug because I
So
was going to
Dambonnet?
say Salon, but then don't think so for 2003. So yeah, I'm matching you on Krug.
Dambonnet.
It is Dom Perignon P2.
P2.
No way.
Yeah, P2. Which, I mean, Hermione, you probably can talk to us a little bit more on that. Maybe explain what P2 is, but effectively, it's been aged longer on lease versus the vintage. I mean, you probably know, right?
Yeah, it's just extended aging. So you've got P2 and P3. It's just been extended.
That's a
It's
juggernaut
aging, so-
performance.
Yeah. But then,
I think that sort of that ties in a lot of the aspects of then, okay, well, how are we looking at this data? Because it's like, well, that is at the very, I think this is encouraging actually for the market, to be honest, because a lot of the stuff we've talked about is like, okay, well, there's people buying bigger volume in off prime, like 21 Bordeaux for value. But then if you're talking about something like this, which is at probably the polar opposite end of the spectrum for champagne, it's a lot rarer. It's like you say, it's longer lease in terms of the access, and there's
and also, like, we're not talking about small numbers. Like the 98's
No.
traded 12 times this year versus last year was 6, right? So it's not like, one's traded here and there and someone's paid a slightly higher price.
No.
There is actually a good level of substance to the data here that this has actually increased in value by almost 15% in the first half of the year. But if we said the trend that we saw maybe in Bordeaux and Burgundy was around value, around people willing to pay for quality and for age, because we saw, okay, as I said, read out earlier, vintages like 09, in Bordeaux, vintages 2000, 2005, 2009, 2010 have outperformed the average. Again, similarly in Burgundy, we're saying the same sort of vintages outperforming, like older, high quality. I was thinking to myself, well, actually, P2 in a way kind of has that inherently in the wine because it has been aged longer on lease, so it's been in the cellar longer. It has a more complexity. It's ready to.
Less of it.
It's mature. It's got complexity to it. But it's released onto market. Only in the last few years, but after 10 years probably on aging. So we know that kind of is representing, what we're seeing in a way in the trends elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's kind of I'm reading too much into that? Or
No,
do you
I
think that's
don't.
something else?
I think that is the case, and I think that's what I found really interesting, digging a bit more closely into some of the data. Briefly, earlier this week, we were looking at Petrus and vintages of Petrus, and I think what's been fascinating to me that we've been able to dig deeper in than we perhaps have before with what previously was available is looking at these older, more mature vintages, but prime vintages nonetheless, that definitely are in this category, right? I mean, the 89 Petrus was one that I was quite surprised by in terms of how it scored and how it's performed and all of the metrics that we consider. Versus, some of the modern vintages, which it makes a lot of sense, I think. And we talk about how wine doesn't appreciate in a linear fashion, and I think there's right and wrong times to approach even back vintages, and I think now is a good time to be approaching back vintages.
Yeah.
I think we're also seeing, potentially from COVID, a lot more people wanting to, enjoy and drink these wines that perhaps they wouldn't have been, drinking previously. I think, especially with champagne, I think you have a lot more consumers who aren't just drinking champagne for, as a celebration, but actually just purely for
As a
enjoyment
wine.
purposes.
I think there's also something to think about kind of in a down market, are the older, more mature, high quality vintages effectively more resilient? Mainly because maybe there's less supply of those wines, maybe because of the maturity and people's willingness not to sell those. And obviously in a down market, we're seeing an overcorrection maybe in younger vintages, to the point like that example I gave earlier, 21 Haut Briand, is it sub 250 per bottle? That feels like an overcorrection. I look at like Bordeaux 2019, probably the worst performing vintage of all the vintages in Bordeaux, but it's a great vintage. It looks incredible value. You look at Burgundy 2019, arguably going to be one of the best ever vintages ever made from Burgundy. And again, that's actually performed quite badly in terms of the proportion of wines that are trading lower. So I think one of the takeaways maybe from the half-year report is kind of saying, in a down market, we are seeing more resilience and more kind of price resilience in those higher quality, more mature vintages. And similarly, in a down market, we're seeing younger vintages maybe overcorrecting. So that might actually represent, when the market starts to stabilize, more opportunities in these younger vintages that have overcorrected.
Yeah, like buying up volume in value and buying up opportunistic in aged vintages that are good. Yeah.
And to segue beautifully on from that point, I just wanted to give you another example. And we haven't got a huge amount of time left, so I just want to go run through a couple of examples. So I do think they are interesting. Our report is available and it goes into a huge amount of depth. There's a lot of data to get involved with. So I do encourage people that have been interested by this podcast to get access and a copy of that online. But Tianello, for example, right, we looked at the older vintages, so 09, 10, 11, 12, 13, compared to younger vintages, so 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. That wine for the in 2025, for the older vintages, they've increased in price over 10%. So they're at £1,400 versus just sub of 1,300 per 12 in 2024. So actually, again, older vintages of Tianello are showing quite well. Whereas on the flip side, the younger vintages have dropped quite significantly. So the younger vintages have gone from 1381 in 24 to 1230. So again, I kind of think it's like the perfect illustration of that point where in this current down market, we're seeing those older vintages kind of actually, have some price appreciation, and those younger vintages maybe being slightly oversold into the market, which is an interesting trend, I think, kind of illustrating that point.
And visibility of older vintages, as you said, like in an upward trending market, less likely people are going to willing to let go of some of those more cherished vintages that are older. Whereas now you can see them, you can find them, and they tend to be a bit better value than you might have thought. And you go, okay, why not? But then equally, to your point, younger vintages, maybe it's a bit of a sign about sort of patience of buyers, apathy towards en primeur and futures buying. Younger vintages, bigger volume getting bought up perhaps for restaurants and stuff. It's not often you see as many wine lists decorated with good older vintages. I think maybe there's that yearning for like just more mature stuff that people haven't maybe had a chance to buy, but now they can because it's cheaper.
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly finish on the rest of the world category because I did mention it at the very beginning. It's been a real standout performer. Hermione mentioned the rest of the world category in one of her favourite places or favourite trips she ever went on to in terms of South America. But in terms of the numbers for this category, what's interesting is some of these performance. So Vega Sicilia has been a real outperformer. 60% of Vega Sicilia wines have traded higher this year than last year. But what's interesting is it hasn't been Unico that's been dominating it. It's actually been the rest of the portfolio of wines. So Valbuena is actually the best performing wine. Valbuena has traded 7 times this year. Its average price change is 11.5% up. But Vega Sicilia is one of these wines where they've got a number of different wines they make under their brand, and they're all performing really well. But then looking at this list, Penfolds has done well this year, both Bin 798 and Grange. Lopez de Heredia, Tondonia Tinto Reserva, Rioja Alta's done well, and Cloa Palta, which is another wine from Chile that gets distributed from the Place de Bordeaux. What's your immediate takeaway from that, to see some of these brands that I've just mentioned, some of these regions that I've just mentioned, kind of outperforming the rest of the market and actually doing better than some of the better known, more well-known, regions like Bordeaux and Burgundy?
Well, I think it is the time when people are looking to diversify. They don't want to just buy Bordeaux and Burgundy. They want to look for, for value outside of it. And I think there is a lot of opportunity. As you say, like Spain is underappreciated. I think we're starting to see a change. The same with Germany when we were talking about Riesling. It's underappreciated, but I think people are wanting to diversify what they have in their collections and moving a little bit away from the norm of Bordeaux, Burgundy. So I think we're definitely starting to see that. I think also with South America, what's quite interesting is they've had to work really hard to get their wine and their name on the map. Yeah. And they've spent the last, however long actually building up their brands. So I think now people are starting to recognize the value in their brands because they've had to work a lot harder to get their wines out there and for people to actually appreciate them and drink them.
And I think a great example of that is Vino Dom Melchor, which last year the 21 vintage won Wine Spectator's #1 wine of the year. And actually, again, looking at the trading data in the first half of the year, again, it's another producer and winery that's done pretty well. But actually, interesting, it's not the 21 vintage. It's actually people maybe looking at value from other vintages like the 18 and the 19 as an example. But I think I agree with you 100%. I think the other thing about for me is kind of looking what happened in the last 4 years when the market really had that pandemic fueled boom, and we can probably call it a little bit of a bubble now in terms of how much the prices went up. I think this category of wines didn't have that big uptick in the way that, say, Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne in Italy had. And so I think as a result of it in the down market, they haven't had as much to come down from. But I think something that Jonathan mentioned to me earlier about some of these wines, especially the Spanish wines, Rioja Alta, Tondonia, for example, Rioja, like the value you get there is incredible. These wines are like 30, 40, 50 pounds per bottle in bond.
And they're phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. They're mature, they're high quality, which again,
they're picking up
that's
the
trend we're seeing in the market. People happy to pay for quality, for maturity, for value for money, right? And so this category reflects that, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, it's just that kind of almost like that downwind nature of, we've covered it obviously at length with Bordeaux, tough time from Primeur, people getting a little bit like where next, maybe the same with Burgundy in slightly different ways, maybe people not finding it as easy to access the right labels. Prices have obviously gone through the roof in the last few years. And like you said, I think, the rest of the world category, which is one that I really enjoy tasting and exploring, is one that's coming from a lower base. They're getting better and better. A lot of them, it's a misassumption that they, would have, they're kind of new to things. They've been making these wines for decades, for centuries as well. And I think people's yearning for that kind of newcomer versus, the old guard type situation is one that is capturing everyone's interest. I mean, the Almaviva, I beg your pardon, the Valbuena I looked at for a while now, and it's just incredibly good value, and it's a great wine. And I think even that as a sort of second wine of Vega has been caught up by that disparity that Vega's been performing well. So I think,
I've even heard wine buyers, wine drinkers say stuff like, "Oh, actually, I prefer Valbuena because it's better value."
Yeah, exactly.
They kind of go, "Well, I'm not going to spend £200-300 on Vega Sicilia. I'd rather spend 100 on Valbuena."
Yeah, and it makes sense, and that's where the market's at currently. So I think the more people that are aware of those better value options from estates wherever they are is kind of how we're going to continue to see these volumes pick up.
So look, the takeaway from the half-year report, just to wrap it up, prices on average are down, but volumes are trading up, which I think is an encouraging sign for the market.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing people where vintages are performing well. It happens to be the older, higher quality vintages. I think where we're also seeing pockets of good performing wines, it generally is wines that are offering good value, good quality and good maturity. So I think that's the kind of trends we're looking at. But I think right now, there's a lot of opportunities in the market for wines that are potentially overcorrected, which are potentially the younger vintages.
Yeah. And I think to Tom's point, we haven't got anywhere near enough time to cover everything. So the report is incredibly detailed. I think would encourage, everyone listening to find a copy either on the website or we'll be distributing it. But I think
we're actually also going to make a free download for the 3,000 wines that have traded in 2025. There'll be a free download for that, so you can actually delve into for the more geeky, statistical minded people at home. They can actually download that and actually delve into it themselves as well.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, like I said, it's gonna give a lot of those people a really good few hours worth of data to tuck into. So I think it's going to be a really interesting thing for us to use going forward as well.
And do you have any burning questions for Hermione?
I do. I was going to wrap us up, Hermione. If you could choose any bottle you've ever sourced to share at a dinner with friends, obviously Tom and I will be gladly there as well, if that's okay. What would it be?
Any wine I've ever sourced. Do you know what? A wine that is quite sort of close to my heart, so it might be a little bit surprising, and that I'm not saying something like DLC or Loire, is VCC 2004. And the reason I say that is because it was a wine that I drank with my aunt in a midweek meal, sort of in celebration of her husband, my uncle's, when he died. it was a wine that he used to love and he drank a lot of. So for me, I don't know, it's something that is quite special. I think it's a phenomenal wine. So
Nice.
I think I would take VCC 2004.
Very nice. Very nice indeed.
Have you got one?
I mean, on theme, but yeah, Vega Sicilia has always had my heart. I remember having the Valbuena number 5. I think it was the 08 vintage, I want to say, and it was outside a golf club in Spain, which felt very appropriate, and that was a lovely setting and a lovely wine. So
And you played well that day?
played okay. I mean,
Okay.
yeah,
I thought that might have
Valderrama's
helped.
quite tough, so yeah, it wasn't the best scoring round, but it was there was some good stuff in there. But yeah, no, thank you ever so much for joining us, Hermione. I think it was really insightful hopefully for listeners to get a grasp on some of the complexities around, sourcing and buying wine, as well as us obviously enjoying it and distributing it. Tom, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for joining. A really, really interesting pod. Enjoyed it immensely. Jonathan, thank you again
Thank
for
you,
joining.
Tom. Yeah.
We're getting the hang of this now, I think.
Starting to.
Yeah,
think.
slowly but surely.
Well,
Um,
thank you for having me.
no,
Of
thank you
course.
very much. And bringing some much needed colour to the sofa. So yeah, if you're enjoying today's podcast, whether you're listening at home or whether you're watching online, make sure you like, subscribe, and keep up to date with when we're going to be releasing the next one. Of course, make sure you comment at home. Keep the comments clean, of course. And yeah, let us know what you think. If you've got any questions, any topics you'd like us to cover, any people you'd like us to interview, any guests you'd love to see on the show, let us know. We are here for you. But thanks very much for joining us, and we will see you next time.